My name is Emily Carter. I was 36 when the people I loved most shattered me. At Christmas dinner, my father's voice cut through the laughter as he called me a burden. My mother laughed into her glass of wine, and my sister sat silent while the guests froze in shock. I walked out that night, humiliated and heartbroken, but the worst came the next morning when I opened our joint account and found $12,500 gone stolen by my own sister. That betrayal turned my grief into fire. I stopped paying every bill, every mortgage, every light they had relied on me for. And as their house slipped into darkness, as foreclosure notices covered their door, I began building a new life they could never touch. That night was only the beginning. To understand how it all unfolded, let me take you back to that Christmas dinner in Des Moines, when I thought my hard work might finally hold my family together. The smell of cinnamon and roasted turkey wrapped itself around me the moment I stepped into the dining room. I had been standing at the stove since dawn, my hands chapped from scrubbing and my shoulders sore from leaning over counters. At 36 years old, I had grown used to being the one who made holidays happen in our house in Des Moines. I baked the pies, polished my mother's china, ironed the tablecloth, even strung the lights in the front yard because my father's knees ached and my mother never bothered. This year I told myself it was worth it. If the food looked good and the house glowed with warmth, maybe for one night we could be a family. The long dining table stretched across the room, every seat filled. Aunts and uncles squeezed shoulder to shoulder, cousins balanced plates on their laps. Neighbors who had no plans were invited, filling the corners with chatter. Children giggled with candy canes sticking from their mouths. The noise was almost overwhelming, but I clung to the idea that laughter was better than silence. I glanced around the table and tried to let myself believe that all my work mattered. At the head of the table sat my father, Michael. He was 68 but still broad-shouldered, his presence heavy even when he said nothing. He cradled a glass of red wine as if it were a badge of authority. Next to him, my mother Linda swirled her own glass with practiced elegance, her half-smile daring anyone to question her. Across from me sat my younger sister, Sarah, 34, her eyes glued to her plate. She pushed at her mashed potatoes, stirring them into little swirls like she always did when tension simmered. She never defended me, never looked up when things turned ugly. I busied myself with details, pouring gravy for an uncle, refilling water glasses, sliding another basket of rolls down the table. My back throbbed, but I ignored it. I wanted the night to flow, wanted so badly for someone to notice the effort I poured into this family. For a moment, with candles flickering against polished china and silverware, glinting in the warm light, I almost let myself relax. Then my father set his glass down. The thud against the wood snapped through the chatter like a whip. Conversations faltered, forks paused midair. A hush spread around the table. My stomach tightened. I knew the sound too well. It meant he had something to say, and it would never be good. He looked straight at me. His voice carried with cruel clarity. "You are nothing but a burden. We want to live without you." The words dropped into the silence like a hammer blow. My chest hollowed out, the air gone from my lungs. For a heartbeat, I thought I had imagined it, that the wine had slurred his meaning. But then I saw the smirk twist at the corner of his mouth and knew he meant it. My mother's laugh followed, sharp and brittle, slicing through me more than the words themselves. Sarah kept her head bent, her fork moving in tiny circles as if digging a tunnel to escape. Around me, the guests froze. My uncle stared fork halfway to his mouth. One cousin leaned toward another, whispering, their eyes darting between me and my father. A neighbor looked down at her lap, embarrassed to have witnessed it. A child at the far end asked what was wrong and was shushed quickly. The only sounds were the crackle of the fireplace and the beating of my heart in my ears. Humiliation hit me like fire. I thought of the years I had given up the design studio I built and sold in 2019 to cover his surgery bills, the mortgage payments I made so they could keep this house, the electric and water bills I carried month after month, all of it erased in a single sentence. Not gratitude, not acknowledgement, only public condemnation. My face burned. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs to keep them steady under the table. I wanted to shout, to hurl back the list of sacrifices, to tell every person at that table exactly how much I had given. But my mouth refused to open. My mother's laugh drowned me out before I could even try. Sarah's silence stabbed deeper than laughter. My father leaned back, satisfied, as though he had spoken some universal truth. And all those witnesses, family and neighbors alike, sat frozen, complicit in their silence. No one came to my defense. The weight of it pressed down on me, but beneath the humiliation something else hardened. If they saw me as nothing but a burden, then perhaps it was time I stopped carrying them on my back. The thought steadied me more than anything else had in years. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped against the floor with a shriek that made heads jerk up. The sound filled the room like a warning bell. My hands no longer shook. I reached for the coat draped over my chair. My mother raised her brows but said nothing. Sarah's fork kept circling. My father's chin lifted as though daring me to speak. I slid my arms into the sleeves, buttoning the coat with deliberate calm. Each click of the buttons sounded louder than the murmurs starting to ripple around me. My uncle shifted uncomfortably. My aunt lowered her gaze. Some faces showed pity, some judgment, most relief that it was me and not them. I refused to give them tears. I would not give my father the satisfaction of seeing me break. I turned toward the door. The walk across the dining room felt both endless and strangely freeing. The whispers grew behind me like a tide I refused to be pulled into. My hand closed on the brass knob, cool against my skin. I pulled it open, and the December night poured in, a rush of icy air colliding with the warmth behind me. The contrast felt like a doorway between two lives. For one long moment I stood on the threshold. Snowflakes drifted down under the glow of the street lamps, the quiet outside a stark contrast to the suffocating silence within. Christmas lights blinked cheerfully from neighboring houses, mocking in their normalcy. Behind me I heard chairs shift, glasses clink as if life at that table would go on without me. But no apology followed. No one called my name. My father sat in triumph. My mother sipped her wine. My sister stared at her plate. I stepped out the porch, boards creaking under my boots. The cold bit at my face, sharp and cleansing. Snow crunched with each step down the stairs. My breath rose in white clouds vanishing into the night. The sting in my eyes threatened tears, but I blinked them back. I had promised myself not to let them see me fall apart. The street stretched quiet and long, lined with houses glowing warm and safe. Families gathered around tables that would never know what had just happened at mine. I kept walking head high, heart pounding but steady. I didn't look back, not once. The morning light streamed through the blinds in thin stripes, cutting across the living room of Daniel's apartment. My coat still smelled faintly of smoke from the fireplace I had left behind the night before. I had not slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my father's voice again, heavy and merciless, calling me a burden. The humiliation clung to me like frost, yet when I woke in the unfamiliar quiet of Daniel's place, another kind of ache settled deeper. It was the silence of knowing nothing would ever be the same. Daniel appeared from the kitchen holding 2 mugs of coffee. His brown hair was messy from sleep, his glasses pushed up on his nose. At 39, with his steady presence and calm voice, he was the one place in my life that felt safe. He set the mug in front of me and sat beside me on the couch. His hand brushed mine, gentle but firm, grounding me. "Tell me what happened," he said softly. The words caught in my throat, but I forced them out. I told him about the dinner, about my father's declaration, about my mother's laugh, about Sarah staring at her plate while I stood alone. I kept my voice low, but my chest burned as if the fire from last night had followed me. "Here." Daniel listened without interrupting. His arm slid around my shoulders and pulled me close when my voice faltered. When I finished, the room was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock. He pressed his lips against the top of my head. "You don't deserve that, Emily. None of it." I wanted to believe him, but the doubt ran deep. To distract myself, I reached for my laptop on the coffee table. I needed to know where I stood, what I had left. My fingers shook as I logged into the bank account that Sarah and I shared. It had always been meant for household bills, a way to keep everything organized since I was the one covering so much. The numbers loaded slowly. When the balance appeared, my stomach dropped. It was thousands less than it should have been. My pulse quickened as I scrolled through the recent transactions. Then I saw them. Repeated transfers, each labeled with the same phrase. Midwest-style boutique. I blinked, reading it again, hoping I had misunderstood. The total was $12,500. Withdrawn steadily over months, Sarah's so-called project. A boutique idea she had boasted about once at Thanksgiving. A dream she claimed would change her life. She had never told me she was pulling from the joint account. She had never asked. I sat back against the couch, my breath catching. Betrayal settled heavy in my chest. Different from the sting of last night, this wasn't humiliation. This was theft wrapped in silence. My own sister had taken from me, trusting that I was too distracted with paying for electricity, water, the mortgage, all the things that kept the house running. She knew I was too busy saving everyone else to check closely. Daniel noticed the way my hands trembled against the laptop. "What is it?" he asked. I turned the screen toward him. "Look." His eyes scanned the transactions, his jaw tightening. "Emily, that's her." I nodded, words stuck in my throat. Sarah had let me stand there in that dining room while our father called me a burden, while our mother laughed, while neighbors whispered. She had stayed silent, knowing all along that she had been siphoning money out of the very account I managed. She had left me to carry the shame while she carried off my savings. The room tilted slightly as the weight of it sank in. I closed the laptop with a snap and pressed my hands against my face. All those years of sacrifice, all those bills I had covered, and the one person I thought might stand beside me had chosen to betray me instead. Daniel's arm tightened around me. "You can't keep giving to them," he said, his voice firm now. "They will keep taking until there is nothing left of you." I pulled my hands away, my eyes stinging. I had thought the worst wound was my father's voice stripping me of dignity in front of everyone. I realized now that Sarah's silence was sharper because behind it she had been draining me. Betrayal is colder than humiliation. It burrows deeper because it comes from the person who should have been closest. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. The cheap rug beneath my feet blurred as my vision swam. I had carried my family through crises, poured my savings into them, sold the studio that had been my pride, and for what? To be called a burden, to be stolen from, to be left standing alone. The truth pressed in around me, unavoidable. Last night had been the public execution of my role in the family. This morning was the private confirmation that I had never been valued, not even by my sister. Daniel touched my hand again, steady, anchoring me back. "You don't have to decide anything right this second. But you can't let this go on." I nodded slowly. My heart was pounding, but clarity crept in through the noise. The dinner had broken something between us, but Sarah's theft shattered whatever pieces remained. It wasn't only my father who had pushed me out. It was my sister who had cut me off long before with every dollar. She slipped away. I straightened, wiping my eyes. This was the final push. The humiliation of last night could have been endured if I still believed there was loyalty somewhere in that house. But now I knew better. There was no loyalty. There was only what they could take from me until nothing remained. I looked at Daniel. My voice was low but steady. "I am done being their safety net." His eyes softened, but he did not try to talk me out of it. He only nodded, his quiet support stronger than any speech could have been. The apartment felt different then, quieter, safer, as if the walls themselves had taken my side. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted in slow spirals, covering the street below in a soft white layer. The world moved on, indifferent to what had happened inside that house. But in my chest, something had shifted permanently. I leaned back against the couch, the laptop closed beside me. Betrayal was no longer just a feeling. It was evidence in black and white, a trail of numbers leading to the one person I had trusted most. It hurt in a way I could not yet describe, but it also cleared the fog. This was the line. There would be no going back. The lamp on Daniel's desk cast a pool of golden light across my laptop, the rest of his apartment dim and quiet. My untouched coffee had gone cold hours ago. I had been staring at the same screen, scrolling through the lines of payments tied to my account, unable to look away. Each one was a reminder of how much of myself I had poured into a family that had given nothing back but scorn. Mid-American Energy, Des Moines Waterworks, Wells Fargo Mortgage, CenturyLink Internet, State Farm Car Insurance. The names stared back at me like silent accusers. Month after month, year after year, I had been the one holding everything together, while they lived under that roof and called me a burden. Daniel sat on the couch, his history papers stacked neatly at his side. He had given up grading for the night, watching me instead, sensing the battle I was fighting inside. His voice was quiet when he finally spoke. "You don't have to do this right now." I kept my eyes on the glowing screen. "I do," I said. My finger hovered over the first line. "The electric company." I thought of winters when the wind cut like knives across Iowa, how I had always made sure their heat stayed on. I had written those checks without hesitation, while my father sat in his recliner, barking at me for being late with dinner, never once asking how the bill was paid. The memory burned. I clicked the cancel button. A small window popped up asking if I was sure. Yes. A click, and the weight of that chain slipped free. The water bill came next. I remembered standing at their sink long after everyone else had gone to bed, washing the dishes no one touched, the warm water numbing my cracked hands. I remembered quick showers before work, leaving the hot water untouched so my mother could take hers in. Peace. They never noticed. My chest tightened. I canceled it with one tap. The internet line blinked on the screen. CenturyLink. I thought of Sarah scrolling her phone endlessly on the couch while I worked late into the night, her silence filling the room as if it were proof of her innocence. She had taken from me, and still she sat in judgment. I clicked cancel. One by one I stripped away the ties, the car insurance for my father's truck, the one he rarely drove anymore but insisted on keeping. Gone. Each confirmation felt like cutting another rope that had bound me for too long. My breathing steadied, as if I were finally exhaling after years of holding my breath. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes on me. "Emily, are you sure about this?" he asked softly. "Once you press that last button, there's no undoing it." I looked at him. They told me last night that they wanted to live without me. Now they will. The mortgage line waited at the bottom of the list, heavier than all the rest. Wells Fargo Mortgage. For 3 years, nearly $2,000 a month had poured from my account into that house. I remembered 2019, the day I sold my design studio, the small storefront I had built from scratch. I remembered signing the papers with trembling hands, watching my dream vanish so my father could have surgery, so the mortgage could stay afloat. I remembered walking past the empty window weeks later, the ghost of my name still visible in the sunlight, my pride gone with it. I hovered over the cancel button. My hand shook. Memories crashed through me, the late nights I stayed awake, calculating how to stretch what I had, the times I skipped meals to make sure the payment cleared, the hollow thank yous that never came. Daniel's hand covered mine, warm and steady. "You can stop here," he said gently. I shook my head. My voice was low but fierce. "This is the one that matters." I clicked. The box appeared, asking again if I was certain. I pressed yes. The line vanished from the account. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Then the release hit me so hard I gasped. The chain was gone. The weight I had carried alone for so long finally lifted. My chest expanded, air filling places that had been tight and constricted for years. My eyes burned, but no tears fell. What I felt was not grief. It was freedom. Daniel squeezed my hand, his voice calm but strong. "You just took your life back." I closed the laptop slowly. The click of it shutting sounded louder than my father's words the night before. It was final. The lamp threw long shadows across the room, and for the first time in years, the silence around me was not heavy. It was peaceful. I leaned back in the chair, my palms pressed against my knees. The quiet hummed in my ears, not suffocating but clean. In my mind, I pictured the house back in Des Moines, glowing with Christmas lights. I wondered how long it would take before they noticed. Tomorrow when the first service failed, or next week when the bills piled up, I imagined my father's fury, my mother's trembling, Sarah's excuses. For the first time, the thought didn't paralyze me, it steadied me. I stood and walked to the window. Snowflakes drifted in slow spirals past the glass, catching the yellow streetlight blanketing the ground below. The world was silent, as if holding its breath with me. I pressed my palm to the cold glass and felt the sting seep into my skin. Behind me, Daniel's voice was quiet but certain. "You did the right thing." I turned and met his gaze. "They chose to throw me out. Now I choose to leave them behind." He nodded, no arguments, no hesitation, just quiet support. I returned to the chair and sat, my hands folded loosely in my lap. The apartment seemed different now, brighter somehow, as if the act of canceling those payments had shifted something in the air. The burden I had carried for years no longer clung to me. I was no longer their lifeline. I was no longer their burden. A strange calm settled over me. For the first time in my life, I was untethered. What came next, I didn't know. But I knew one thing with certainty. The power had shifted. I was no longer the one begging for acceptance. They were the ones who would learn to live without me. The snow fell thicker outside, muffling the city, erasing the tracks of the day. Inside, I breathed steady and deep, my heart no longer racing with fear, but beating with something close to resolve. The ties were cut. The house, the bills, the endless demands, all gone. What remained was mine. The first call came less than 24 hours after I shut down. The mortgage. I was sitting at Daniel's small kitchen table, my sketchbook open, trying to distract myself by drawing. Lines bled across the page, but my mind kept drifting back to the glow of that house in Des Moines and the faces at the dinner table. My phone buzzed against the wood, and my father's name lit up the screen. My stomach tightened. I could have ignored it, but something in me wanted to hear the panic in his voice. I swiped to answer. The roar hit me immediately. "The lights are out, Emily. The water isn't running. What did you do?" I leaned back in the chair, pressing the phone tighter to my ear so Daniel wouldn't have to hear the full force of it. My voice came out calm, almost detached. "You told me I was a burden. You said you wanted to live without me. Now you can." There was a stunned pause, then his voice thundered louder. "Don't you play games with me. You put those bills back in your name right now." I felt a bitter laugh rising, but it came out cold instead. "No, not anymore." Before he could spit another insult, I ended the call. My hand trembled when I set the phone down, the adrenaline leaving me shaky. But my chest didn't feel hollow this time. It felt lighter. Daniel looked up from the couch where he had been reading, his eyes filled with quiet worry. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. He's exactly who I thought he'd be. The phone rang again that evening. My mother's name this time. Against my better judgment, I answered. Her voice spilled through the line, softer than I had ever heard it, thick with desperation. "Emily, please. The bills are piling up. The house is cold. Your father is furious. We don't know what to do." Her tone tugged at something deep inside me, but the memory of her laughter at the Christmas table burned hotter. I remembered the tilt of her glass, the sparkle in her eyes as she giggled while I was humiliated. My voice shook but stayed steady enough. You laughed when Dad called me a burden. You let him strip me down in front of everyone. That was different, she rushed out. The wine, the stress, you know how he gets. No, I said firmly. That was who you are. And I'm done paying the price for it. Her breath caught as if she might cry, but she didn't apologize. She only whispered, please, we're family. Family doesn't do what you did, I said, and I hung up before my resolve cracked. My chest ached after, but not with guilt. It was the ache of finally speaking the truth. The next morning, Sarah's name appeared on my screen. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. I answered, bracing myself. Her voice was sharp, dripping with accusation. You are so selfish, Emily. Do you even know what you've done? Mom and Dad are falling apart because of you. My anger flared hot and immediate. Selfish! The word rang in my ears like a slap. I know about the $12,500, Sarah, I said, my voice low and steady. Midwest-style boutique. You drained our account and said nothing. You let me carry everything while you stole. The silence on her end was long. I could hear faint typing, the sound of her nails hitting the keys. Then she scoffed. You're making this about me? Typical. The fury in me solidified. You betrayed me. You don't get to lecture me about family. I ended the call before she could fire back. My pulse hammered, my hand shaking as I set the phone down. For a moment, the room spun, but when it stilled, I felt stronger. Daniel set a mug of coffee in front of me, his hand brushing mine. You did what you had to, he said. I wrapped my fingers around the mug, letting the heat seep into my skin. My heart was still racing, but the ground beneath me felt steadier. Their voices had always controlled me. Last night, humiliation, this morning, betrayal. But now, each call was another reminder that their words could no longer break me. That afternoon, the pounding at the door startled both of us. Daniel opened it, and there she stood. My mother. Her hair was disheveled, her coat hastily buttoned, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying. Daniel stepped back, uncertain, but I walked forward, my body tense. Emily, she whispered, clutching her hands together. Please let me talk to you. I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. You drove here to beg instead of to apologize. She flinched. I didn't come to fight, we are struggling. Your father is furious, Sarah is... She trailed off, shaking her head. We just need a little help until things settle. I stared at her, searching her face for even a flicker of remorse for what she had done that night. There was none. Just need, just expectation. You laughed while he called me worthless, I said. You sat there and said nothing while Sarah stole from me. You abandoned me first. Her lips parted, trembling, but no words came. She turned her eyes down her shoulders, slumping. We're family, she whispered again, weaker this time. Families don't abandon each other. My throat tightened, but my voice came out firm. You abandoned me. The silence stretched between us until she finally turned and walked out the door, her step slow, heavy with defeat. Daniel shut the door behind her, the click of the lock sealing the space with quiet. I sank onto the couch, my body shaking, but not from fear. From the release of years of weight crashing down at once. My hands were trembling, but my heart beat steady. For the first time, I knew the lines were drawn. The phone buzzed again later that night. I didn't need to look to know it was my father. I let it ring until it stopped. The silence that followed was louder than his yelling. I leaned back against Daniel's shoulder, closing my eyes. My family could rage, plead, accuse, but the decisions were made. The ties were cut. The thought scared me, but it also steadied me. For years, their voices had been chains. Tonight, I realized I was no longer bound. The morning after my mother showed up at Daniel's apartment, I woke to the buzz of my phone rattling across the nightstand. The light from the window was dim, heavy with snow clouds, but the glow of the screen was relentless. Notifications stacked one after another, hundreds of them. At first I thought maybe it was more missed calls. But when I swiped, I saw the truth. Sarah had gone public. Her post sat at the top of my feed, long and dripping with poison. Some people think they are better than their own family, she wrote. My sister Emily Mitchell abandoned our parents at Christmas. She cut off the heat, the water, and the lights. She told us we mean nothing to her. Now my parents are suffering because she refuses to help. My breath stuck in my chest as I scrolled. Comments flooded beneath. Neighbors we had grown up with, people who had eaten at our table, now shaking their heads and writing. That's so sad, one woman wrote. How could she turn on her parents like that? An old friend from high school chimed in. Always thought Emily looked down on everyone. Guess we were right. Then Brian appeared. My cousin had shared Sarah's post, adding his own knife twist. Knew she'd betray them one day. She was always acting too good for us. I set the phone face down on the table as if the weight of it could smother the noise. My heart raced, humiliation flooding me. Christmas dinner had been bad enough, but at least that humiliation ended at the walls of that house. Now Sarah had thrown it into the street for everyone to watch. Daniel walked in, his hair messy from sleep, and saw my face. He didn't need to ask. He set a steaming cup of coffee in front of me and sat down. "You read it," he said quietly. I nodded, unable to find words. "Let them talk," he said, his hand brushing mine. I wanted to believe him, but anger boiled inside me. I pictured myself typing a reply, posting screenshots of every bill, every bank transfer. I wanted to shove the truth into their faces. But another voice whispered that it would never matter. People didn't come online for proof. They came for spectacle, and Sarah had given them one. That Sunday, I followed Daniel to church anyway. I told myself I could hold my head high, that I didn't care, but my stomach twisted as soon as we walked through the doors. The sanctuary was filled with familiar faces, many of whom I had known my whole life. As we slipped into a pew, the whispers started small and sharp. I saw Mrs. Lawrence, who once borrowed money from me when her husband was out of work. She pulled her daughter closer and looked away. An old classmate of Sarah's glanced at me and quickly turned to her friend to whisper. The judgment in the air was thick. Pastor John began his sermon. He spoke in his usual calm tone, but every word felt like it was aimed at me. Families divided by pride, the dangers of selfishness, the way resentment poisons love. He never named me, never named my parents or Sarah, but he didn't have to. Everyone there knew. My cheeks burned hot, and I stared down at the hymnal until the letters blurred. Daniel squeezed my hand. His silence steadied me. When the service ended, people filtered past us. A few gave me tight smiles, pitying but distant. Some avoided me altogether. A deacon muttered that he would pray for me, but his eyes said something harsher. By the time we walked out into the cold, I felt raw, stripped down like I had been at that Christmas table. Back at the apartment, I opened my laptop even though I knew it would hurt. Sarah's post had spread, shared over and over, comments piling higher. One neighbor wrote that I was ungrateful. A man from high school, someone I barely remembered, declared that I had always thought I was better than everyone. It was endless, and each word pressed heavier against my chest. But then, buried in the noise, a message appeared. It was from Mrs. Patel, the bakery owner I had designed menus for years ago. "Emily, is it true? Did you really cover their mortgage and bills all this?" Time I froze reading the words again. It was the first time anyone had questioned Sarah's story. Someone had noticed a crack. Daniel leaned over to read. His voice was calm but certain. "You don't need to fight them in the comments. Let your actions speak." I shut the laptop, my hands trembling. He was right. I thought about all the years I had begged for acknowledgement, fought to prove myself. I had been humiliated at the table, betrayed in private, now smeared in public. And yet, here was the first sign that truth had begun to seep through Sarah's story. That evening, as snow fell heavy outside, Daniel and I walked to the corner store. The air bit at my cheeks, sharp and clean. Inside, we ran into Mrs. Caldwell, whose daughter I had tutored in art years ago. She looked at me carefully, her brow furrowed. "Emily," she asked softly, "is it true you were paying all those bills?" The question stunned me. The rumors had already begun to twist. Not just Sarah's version, but the truth, whispered in kitchens and text threads. I gave a small nod. Her eyes widened, her lips parting as if to speak more. But she only pressed them together, nodded back, and left with her groceries. When we returned, I sat at the table with Daniel, the lamplight soft around us. Sarah thought she had destroyed me with her words. Brian thought he had confirmed it. Even Pastor John had echoed their judgment from the pulpit. But in trying to make me the villain, they had left gaps too wide to hide. People were starting to wonder, starting to ask questions, starting to doubt. And I knew one thing with certainty. Doubt had a way of spreading just as fast as lies. As the snow thickened outside, blanketing the streets in silence, I felt the shift deep inside me. They could scream, they could beg, they could post until the whole town turned against me. But the truth was patient, and truth had already begun to slip through the cracks. The winter sky hung low and heavy over Des Moines, the streets muffled under thick snow. Inside Daniel's apartment, the world felt smaller, safer, yet I could not shake the restless beat in my chest. My family's voices had followed me for weeks, echoing through calls, posts, whispers. But as I stared at the glow of my laptop, I knew the only way forward was to build something of my own again. I pulled up the dusty folder I hadn't opened in years. Portfolio. The word itself made my stomach tighten. One click, and the past flickered to life: logos for bakeries, branding packages for small shops, flyers I had once designed for local fundraisers. A career I had built with my own hands, erased the moment I sold the studio to keep my father's mortgage afloat. The files looked old, dated, some embarrassingly rough, but they were mine. I began to sort, trimming out weaker pieces, polishing the stronger ones. Hours passed unnoticed as I reworked colors, adjusted typefaces, rewrote descriptions. Slowly, something that had been buried stirred again. Daniel came in leaning against the doorway with a mug of tea. He watched me for a long moment, his face soft in the lamplight. "You look alive again," he said. I forced a smile. "I don't even know if anyone will care." "They will," he replied simply, like it was fact. 2 days later, an email arrived that made my heart skip. Cheryl's Coffee House. I blinked at the subject line before opening it. Cheryl, who owned a small cafe downtown, had heard through a friend that I was freelancing again. She needed her menu redesigned and wanted to know if I was available. I read the words twice, my pulse racing. It wasn't a big job, but it was something. I typed a reply quoting a fair price, promising a draft within a week. My fingers trembled as I pressed send. That afternoon, I sat at Daniel's kitchen table with sketches spread around me, pencil smudges darkening my palms. For hours I lost myself in fonts, layouts, small flourishes of design. The radiator hummed, the snow pressed against the windows, and Daniel's soft movements in the kitchen faded into the background. For the first time in years, I felt like myself. When Cheryl's payment arrived a week later, I stared at the notification until my vision blurred. The number wasn't large, but it was real. Money I had earned not for my family, not for survival, but for me. My throat closed, tears spilling before I could stop them. Daniel rushed in, alarmed at first, then pulled me close as I laughed through the tears. "They called me a burden," I whispered, my voice breaking. "But this proves I'm not." He kissed the side of my head, his voice steady. "You were never a burden. You just forgot who you were." The tears came harder at that. Relief, pride, exhaustion. 1,000 emotions pouring out as if years of weight had cracked. Open. The momentum didn't stop. Within days, SparkTech Marketing, a local startup, reached out. They had seen some of my old work online and needed a full branding. Package logos, social media graphics, website layouts. It was bigger than anything I had done in years. I hesitated, fear pricking at me, but I said yes, almost immediately after Olivia's boutique emailed. They needed a seasonal campaign for their clothing line. The irony was sharp. Olivia was one of Sarah's old acquaintances, someone who had once encouraged Sarah's boutique dream. Now she was hiring me. I almost laughed at the twist, but I didn't dwell. Work was work, and it was mine. The days slipped into a rhythm. I woke early, brewed coffee, and sat at the kitchen table surrounded by sketches and notes. Daniel left for school with a kiss on my forehead, and when he returned, I was still at the desk, hair pulled into a messy bun, eyes heavy but focused. One night he slid a plate of food across the table, pulling my laptop gently away. "You need to eat," he said. In a minute I murmured, still scribbling. He chuckled, setting the fork in my hand. "You're unstoppable when you're like this." I smiled faintly, exhaustion sweet instead of suffocating. I had spent years drained by sacrifice. Now I was drained by creation, and it felt good. When SparkTech's first payment came through, I sat frozen at the table. The number glowed back at me more than I had seen in years, more than enough to remind me that I could stand on my own. My breath caught, and then the tears came again, harder this time. Daniel hurried over, pulling me into his arms as I clutched the laptop against my chest. My body shook as I whispered, "They told me I was worthless. They told me I was a burden." His hand smoothed my hair, his voice steady in my ear. "You were never worthless. You just needed to prove it to yourself." I sobbed until the weight in my chest loosened. When I finally leaned back, wiping my face, I saw him smiling at me, pride in his eyes. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself, too. That night, lying awake beside him, I stared at the ceiling, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. Outside, the gossip still churned. Sarah's post still circled. Brian still sneered. Whispers still floated through town. But none of it felt as heavy anymore. Not when I had work lined up. Not when I had my own money flowing into my account. Every sketch, every approved design, every invoice paid was another stone laid in the foundation of the life I was rebuilding. They could spread lies. I had proof. The world outside could judge me, but here at Daniel's table, in the glow of my own work, I was finally free. By March of 2022, the snow in Des Moines had begun to melt into gray slush along the curbs, and the air smelled faintly of thawing earth. My own days had settled into a rhythm of sketches, emails, and client calls. I felt lighter, steadier, even when whispers about me still floated around town. But while I built something new, the Carters unraveled. The first sign came through a neighbor who messaged me late one night. "I drove past your parents' place. There's a notice taped to the door." Looked official. I knew immediately what it was. 90 days late on the mortgage meant the bank had posted a notice of default. Not foreclosure yet, but a warning shot. Renegotiate or sell. Without me, the inevitable had arrived faster than any of them expected. I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, the weight pressing into me. For years, I had been the invisible barrier that kept that house afloat. With me gone, the truth rose to the surface like ice breaking on a river. A week later, I overheard another piece of news. Sarah's boutique in Minneapolis had shuttered. The contract she bragged about on Facebook had fallen through. She couldn't pay rent on the storefront, and the landlord padlocked the doors. She had invested thousands into inventory she couldn't move, and her reputation as a designer started to crumble. Michael, once the booming voice at the head of the table, now picked up odd jobs. He fixed leaky sinks, patched drywall, shoveled driveways for cash. The pay barely stretched far enough for groceries, let alone the mountain of debt pressing in. And Linda, my mother, who once smirked as I was humiliated, retreated into a haze of denial. She told friends how her children had abandoned her, how life had been cruel, but never admitted her own part in the downfall. I tried not to follow the updates, but they found me anyway. One evening my phone buzzed and Sarah's name lit the screen. I answered before I could stop myself. Her voice cracked immediately. "Emily, please. We're falling apart here. The lights are out and the house is freezing. Just help with the electric bill, that's all I'm asking." Her sobs tugged at me sharp and raw. For years I had been the one covering those bills silently, without recognition, without thanks. Now she begged openly, her pride stripped away. I closed my eyes, pressing the phone tighter to my ear. "Sarah, you drained $12,500 from our joint account for your boutique. You watched while Dad called me a burden and Mom laughed. You let them tear me down while you sat in silence. And now you want me to fix it." She hiccuped through the line. "I made mistakes, I know, but this isn't about me anymore. It's Mom and Dad. They're sitting in the dark." My chest ached, but my voice stayed cold. "Then let them sit with their choices. I am done." Her sobs twisted into fury. "You're heartless." I ended the call before her anger could burrow deeper. My hand shook as I set the phone down. The heaviness in my chest made it hard to breathe, but under it all, a steady strength pulsed. Daniel came in from the kitchen, grocery bag in hand. He saw my face and set it down quickly. "Sarah again," I nodded, rubbing my temple. "She wanted me to pay the electric." He looked at me steadily. "And you didn't?" "No," I said. His hand squeezed my shoulder, firm and warm. "That's strength, Emily." But strength did not feel easy. That night I lay awake, hearing Sarah's voice echo in my mind. I pictured the house dark, the walls that once held my childhood memories now silent and cold. My heart twisted with old love, old duty, but every time guilt rose, I reminded myself I had already given everything, and they had thrown it away. By April, the news was unavoidable. The bank had issued a second notice. Without intervention, foreclosure was certain. Friends whispered that the Carters were drowning. Some pitied them. Others shook their heads at the mismanagement. I overheard snippets when I went downtown for client meetings. People clucked their tongues, asking how a family that once seemed stable could fall so fast. I caught my name whispered, sometimes always coded in judgment. But other times, I saw eyes widen with doubt when someone hinted at the truth that I had been the one keeping the lights on all those years. Meanwhile, I worked. Cheryl's cafe menus lined her counter bright and clean. SparkTech's logos went live on their website. Olivia's campaign posters hung in shop windows. Every invoice paid felt like a victory, a shield against the guilt that tried to seep in at night. Still, the calls didn't stop. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Sarah rang again. I stared at the screen before answering, part of me hoping this time would be different. Her voice was sharp, brittle. "You're killing them, Emily." "Mom can't sleep. Dad is breaking his back with jobs that don't pay. Do you know what it's like to watch your parents suffer like this?" I gripped the phone, my jaw tight. "Do you know what it was like to sell my studio to pay their mortgage? To cover every bill while you stole from me to be called a burden in front of the whole family?" She faltered, but then her anger surged. "That doesn't matter now. Just cover the electric for 1 month. 1 month." "No," I said flatly. "You live with your choices." The silence on the other end stretched, broken only by her ragged breathing. Then she spat, "You'll regret this." I hung up before her words could take root. My hands trembled, my heart heavy, but the line I had drawn held. Daniel found me staring at the darkened phone, my breath shallow. He sat beside me, his arms slipping around my shoulders. "You did what you had to," he said gently. I leaned into him, the heaviness pressing down, but underneath it, my resolve stood firm. For years I had been their crutch. Now they were learning to walk without me, even if it meant stumbling into ruin. The Carters were collapsing, and I, for the first time in my life, was not going down with them. Spring sunlight spilled across Daniel's apartment, catching on the edges of the sketches scattered across the table. I had been working late into the night on revisions for Olivia's boutique, trying to drown out the noise of Des Moines, but peace never lasted long. My phone buzzed again, this time with a name I hadn't seen in weeks, Mrs. Green, an old neighbor from the block where I grew up. I hesitated before answering. Her voice was careful, almost apologetic. "Emily, I don't want to overstep, but I thought you should know. Rebecca's been having trouble at school. The tuition's late again, and some of the girls have been saying things about your family. She looked so upset. After we hung up, I sat frozen, staring at the quiet apartment. Rebecca, only 12, Sarah's daughter, my niece. She was innocent in all of this, yet now she carried the burden of whispers in hallways and overdue notices pinned to her backpack. I remembered her tugging at my sleeve years ago, holding out a crumpled drawing of a flower she had sketched. "Do you think it's good, Aunt Emily?" she had asked with wide eyes. I had told her it was beautiful, that she had talent. She had smiled so wide her braces flashed, pride blooming in her cheeks. And now instead of praise, she was hearing her classmates mock her family, watching teachers look at her with pity, shoulders hunched as if trying to make herself smaller. A pang of guilt hit me so hard I pressed a hand to my chest. For a fleeting moment, I imagined picking up the phone, calling the school covering the tuition without telling Sarah. Rebecca didn't deserve to carry this weight. She deserved art classes, laughter at recess, a warm home where bills didn't hover like ghosts. But the thought froze me. That was the trap I had always fallen into. I told myself I was saving the innocent, but each time my family had taken more, hiding behind the shield of someone else's need. Rebecca deserved better, yes, but she had parents, and they had to face their consequences. I pressed my palms against the table, whispering into the silence, "No more." That Sunday, Daniel and I walked into church. The sanctuary smelled faintly of lilies, sunlight filtering through the stained glass in fractured colors. I tried to steady my breath, but whispers began the moment we entered, darting through the crowd like sparks catching dry grass. I caught fragments as we slid into a pew. The bank notice, losing the house, Sarah's boutique shut down, Michael working odd jobs. I kept my eyes on the hymnal, but my ears burned with every word. Pastor John stepped to the pulpit, his voice carrying easily through the vaulted ceiling. He began softly speaking of faith, of patience. But as his words deepened, his tone sharpened. Families, he said, are built on trust. When selfishness corrodes that trust, when pride matters more than love, the house begins to crack. He paused, scanning the congregation. A family built on lies cannot stand. When selfishness becomes the foundation, when cruelty is allowed to thrive, collapse is inevitable. A family broken by selfishness is no family at all. The words rang like glass breaking in my chest. This was no gentle parable. He was naming us, the Carters, my parents. Sarah. The sanctuary shifted, bodies restless, murmurs swelling until they drowned the final hymn. Outside the church, people gathered in clusters, their voices sharper than the spring wind. "They're losing the house. Can you believe it?" I thought they were comfortable. Always knew something was off. Someone whispered my name, half pity, half curiosity. Daniel pressed his hand against the small of my back, steadying me, guiding me past the whispers. His voice was low, certain. "They're starting to see the truth, Emily." Back home, I tried to drown myself in work. SparkTech needed another round of revisions, and Olivia wanted a second draft for her campaign. My desk filled with sketches and color swatches, but my mind drifted back to Rebecca. I saw her sitting alone in a cafeteria tray, untouched, listening to the cruel laughter of kids repeating things their parents whispered at their own tables. My throat tightened until I could barely breathe. She was paying for Sarah's arrogance, for my parents' pride, for choices she had no part in making. I closed my laptop and sat in silence, the ache in my chest nearly unbearable. That evening, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in months. My stomach clenched before my eyes confirmed it. My mother. I let it go to voicemail, my pulse hammering, then pressed play. Her voice filled the room, softer than I had ever heard it. "Emily, I'm sorry. We shouldn't have treated you that way at Christmas. Your father was angry and I should have defended you. I hope you're all right." The sound hollowed me out. For years I had begged for words like these. I replayed the message once, then again, searching for more, waiting for her to say she was sorry for laughing while my father called me a burden. Waiting for her to admit that Sarah stole thousands from me. Waiting for her to acknowledge the years I had sold pieces of my life to keep them afloat. But nothing came. Just vague regret, shallow and late. Daniel stood in the doorway, his eyes on me. "What will you do?" he asked gently. I stared at the phone, the message still replaying in my mind. For years I had thought an apology would heal me. But now that it came, it felt like dust in my hands. Apologies without truth were nothing. With a steady breath, I pressed delete. The screen blinked and her voice was gone. It wasn't rage that guided my hand, it was clarity. I leaned back in the chair, my chest heavy but steady. For the first time, her words hadn't shaken me. They hadn't pulled me back into the cycle of guilt and sacrifice. They were just words, empty without action. That night, Daniel and I sat at the table, the glow of my laptop spilling across sketches. Outside, the city whispered with rumors of foreclosure and failure. Inside, I drew lines, built logos, shaped futures. My phone stayed silent, but in the quiet, I could still hear Rebecca's laughter from years ago, the echo of innocence lost in a storm she hadn't created. I thought of her wide eyes, of Pastor John's words echoing through the sanctuary, of my mother's voice pleading too late. The Carters were unraveling thread by thread, each lie unraveling into silence, and for the first time, I wasn't tangled in the mess. I was outside it steady, drawing something new with hands that finally belonged to me. By the end of 2022, the leaves in Des Moines had turned to brittle gold and the air carried the bite of early frost. My life, once a cycle of sacrifice and silence, had shifted into something I could hardly believe was mine. The small jobs I had picked up in Daniel's kitchen had grown into steady contracts, and for the first time in years, I let myself dream bigger. I signed a lease on a corner office downtown, a modest second-floor space with tall windows that overlooked Locust Street. The first time I turned the key and stepped inside, my chest swelled. The walls were bare, the floor scuffed, the radiator clanked unevenly, but to me it was freedom. I christened it New Horizon Design Studio. The name felt right, a marker of what I had clawed back, the symbol of a life that finally belonged to me. I spent days making the space my own. I scrubbed the dusty windows, bought a second-hand desk from a thrift shop, and hung framed samples of my past work along the walls. Cheryl's menu redesign now brightening her cafe. Sparktech's bold new logo that had helped them land investors. Olivia's boutique posters hanging in shop windows across town. A small museum had just signed on for an exhibit campaign, and my sketches were taped in neat rows along the far wall. Every piece was proof that I was no one's burden. Every nail in the wall, every print hung, felt like driving a stake deeper into my independence. Word spread fast. Clients called, referrals trickled in, and soon my calendar was filled with deadlines and meetings. Some days I barely had time to eat, rushing from sketching sessions to Zoom calls to in-person consultations. I poured myself into the work, hours blurring as the studio began to hum with energy. Daniel would bring me sandwiches after school, shaking his head when he found me still hunched over mock-ups. "You forget to eat when you're on fire," he teased, setting food beside my laptop until I looked up and smiled. But success never came without shadows. One November morning, a potential client from a large insurance firm walked into my office. He was tall, gray-haired, with a suit so sharply pressed it almost cut the air. His handshake was brisk, his expression guarded. We sat across from each other at the conference table, my portfolio open between us. He flipped through the pages slowly, his lips pressed tight, his silence weighing heavy on my chest. "I admire your work," he said finally, "but there are concerns." My stomach tightened. Concerns. He hesitated, then leaned back in his chair. "I've heard things about your family, about you, that there were financial irregularities, that you walked out on obligations, Sarah." The realization hit like ice water dripping down my spine. She was still spreading poison, clinging to whatever scraps of influence she had left. Maybe she thought if she ruined my name, the world would forget hers was already in ashes. I forced myself to sit tall even as my heart hammered. "My family's choices are not mine," I said evenly. "I've paid for their mistakes long enough. What you see in that portfolio is mine alone." He studied me for a long moment, doubt flickering in his eyes. My throat felt dry, but I slid a folder across the table, filled with mock-ups I had worked on for days. Bold, clean designs tailored to his firm, every detail sharpened to perfection. My hand trembled slightly as he opened it. He examined the pages one by one, his brows slowly smoothing, the lines of suspicion softening into something closer to interest. By the time the meeting ended, he stood and shook my hand again, firmer this time. "We'll move forward with you," he said. When the door closed behind him, my knees nearly buckled. I pressed a hand to the table, my breath shuddering out. Sarah had nearly cost me the biggest contract of my career, but she hadn't won. My work had. That evening, Daniel drove me to Gray's Lake. The air was sharp with cold, and the city lights shimmered across the water like broken glass. We walked along the path in silence, our breath clouding in front of us. He stopped under the canopy of oaks, his hand tightening around mine. "Emily," he said, his voice low, "you've rebuilt everything. You fought harder than anyone I know. I don't want to just watch you build, I want to build with you." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside lay a simple silver ring, its band catching the faint glow of the street lamps. My breath caught tears stinging my eyes before I could stop them. For years I had been stripped down, called a burden, cast aside. And now here was Daniel, steady and unwavering, asking me to step into a future I had never dared to imagine. "Yes," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto my finger, his hands trembling as much as mine. We stood there, wrapped in each other, the world fading away, the lake stretching dark and endless beneath the sky. A week later, we walked into my studio together. The winter wind rattled the glass as I unlocked the door, and Daniel followed me inside, his arm warm around my shoulders. The logo I had commissioned for the wall gleamed in the soft light. New Horizon Design Studio etched in bold letters above my desk. We stood there for a long moment, just looking. My eyes burned not with sorrow this time, but with pride. Every cut, every scar, every betrayal had led me here, to this space that was wholly mine. Daniel's hand tightened on mine, his voice quiet but certain. "This is your victory, Emily." I nodded, unable to speak, my throat too thick with emotion. And then, as if the world could not let me savor triumph without testing me, again my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I almost ignored it, but the name on the screen froze me. Rebecca, my niece. She had never called me directly before. I answered with a shaking hand. Her voice was small, wavering. "Aunt Emily, Mom says you're lying to everyone. She says you're stealing clients, that you ruined us on purpose. People at school keep saying things. I don't know what to believe." My knees went weak. The poison had reached Rebecca now, twisting its way into the only innocent heart left untouched. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice calm. "Sweetheart, I would never hurt you. You know that." There was silence, broken only by her shaky breath. I just don't know what's true anymore," she whispered, and then the line went dead. The room swayed around me. Sarah had aimed her final arrow at the one person she knew could break me if I let her. Rebecca's confusion cut deeper than any rumor, any contract lost. Daniel's arm tightened around me, steadying me. His voice was low, fierce. "Don't let her take this from you. Not this." I looked up at the gleaming logo on my wall, the weight of his words settling in. My studio was alive around me. My ring glinted under the light, and for the first time I felt both triumph and terror in equal measure. Sarah had failed to ruin my work, but she had found a new weapon. I pressed my hand against the desk, my ring catching the glow. The world outside still whispered, but in that moment, with Daniel beside me and Rebecca's voice still echoing in my ear, I knew the battle wasn't finished. The spring of 2024 came bright and gentle, the kind of season that seemed to carry promise in every breeze. On a Saturday morning, under a sky brushed with soft clouds, I stood in a meadow just outside Des Moines with Daniel's hand in mine. Rows of folding chairs stretched out behind us, filled with the faces of friends who had walked beside us through every storm. The air smelled faintly of lilacs, and the sound of a nearby creek wove through the quiet hum of conversation. There were no Carters, no Michael, no Linda, no Sarah. Their absence echoed for a moment, but it didn't hollow the day. If anything, it made the circle around me feel stronger, more deliberate. Those who stood with us were there because they chose to be, not because blood demanded it. Daniel's voice steadied me as he spoke his vows. He promised not just to love me, but to see me, to remind me of my worth, even when the world tried to erase it. My own words trembled, but they carried the truth I had earned, that I had been called a burden stripped down to nothing, and yet I had risen, and he had walked with me as I rebuilt. When the officiant finally told us we were husband and wife, laughter and cheers rose into the Iowa sky, and I felt something break open inside me, something lighter than relief, deeper than joy. The reception was small, a picnic spread beneath strings of lights Daniel's colleagues had hung between trees. Cheryl brought pastries from her cafe. Olivia arrived with bouquets she insisted on arranging herself, and SparkTech's founder offered a toast, telling everyone how my designs had given his company the face it needed. We danced barefoot in the grass as twilight fell, Daniel spinning me until my laughter spilled out, unguarded and whole. Later, as I slipped away from the crowd for a moment, I looked out across the field. Fireflies flickered low to the ground, and the sound of music carried faintly from behind me. I thought of the Christmas table 2 years earlier, my father's voice cutting through the laughter of guests, his words sharp as glass. "You're just a burden. We want to live without you." That wound had nearly broken me, but it had also freed me. From that night came every step that had led me here, the decision to walk away, the courage to cancel their bills, the pain of hearing Rebecca's confusion, the weight of my mother's hollow apology. Each scar traced the path to the life I was standing in now. I thought of New Horizon Design Studio, the sign gleaming on the wall above my desk. Clients filled my calendar now. Cheryl's coffee house had expanded. SparkTech was thriving. Olivia's boutique had doubled its revenue with campaigns I designed, and the museum exhibit I branded had drawn record crowds. Each project proved that I was not and had never been a burden. And yet beneath the triumph, there was a softer lesson I had learned. Family does not mean unconditional obligation. Love without respect is not love. To protect myself, I had needed boundaries, lines drawn firm enough that no storm could wash them away. I had once believed that saying no meant selfishness. Now I knew it meant survival. I turned back towards the reception, where Daniel was laughing with our friends, the silver band on his finger catching the lantern light. For years, I had been afraid that cutting myself free from the Carters meant cutting myself free from family altogether. But standing there, I understood I had not lost family. I had chosen it. The music swelled and Daniel's eyes found mine across the meadow. He held out his hand and I walked toward him, my dress brushing the grass, my heart steady. When I reached him, he pulled me close, his forehead resting against mine. "You're home now," he whispered. I smiled through the tears that blurred my vision. For the first time in my life, I believed it. To anyone listening, I want to leave you with this: family does not mean endless obligation. You are allowed to protect yourself, to walk away from those who use your love as a weapon. Boundaries are not cruel. They are proof that you value your own life. I had to lose everything to learn that truth. But in losing it, I found myself again. If you've ever been told you are not enough, if you've carried the weight of being someone else's scapegoat, I want to hear from you. How did you reclaim your worth? How did you draw the lines that set you free? Share your story. Somewhere out there, someone who feels like a burden needs to know they are not alone. A year after our wedding, life settled into a rhythm I had once thought impossible. The mornings began with sunlight pouring through the big windows of our little house near the edge of Des Moines. Daniel brewed coffee while I packed my laptop bag, and we shared quiet conversations over toast before we each went our separate ways. He walked to the high school, where his students waited for stories of history, and I drove downtown to my studio, the sign of New Horizon gleaming against the brick. The studio had grown. What started as a second-hand desk and a handful of clients had become a small team. I hired 2 assistants, both young designers eager to learn, and together we filled the walls with sketches and campaigns. Cheryl's Cafe had expanded to a second location. Spark Tech had gone national, and new businesses knocked on our door weekly. Sometimes, when I looked around at the hum of work and laughter in that office, I felt the old ache rise, the memory of being told I was nothing but a burden. But the ache faded quickly, replaced by pride. I had built all this from ashes. Evenings belonged to Daniel and me. We cooked simple dinners, strolled along Gray's Lake, planned the future in whispers as we folded laundry. We talked sometimes about children, about what kind of family we wanted to create. Not one built on fear or obligation, but on choice and trust. I still heard things about the Carters. They had moved into a smaller rental on the outskirts of town, their presence fading from community conversations. Rebecca sent me a drawing once, slipped into my mailbox without a return address. A sunflower bold and bright. I kept it pinned above my desk as a reminder that innocence can bloom even in broken soil. The storms had passed. The scars remained, but they no longer defined me. They reminded me instead of where I had been and how far I had come. When I locked the studio door at night and slipped my hand into Daniel's, I carried no weight but my own. For the first time, that weight felt light.